What is the lever the devil can pull to get us to move towards sin? This is Mike from Catholic Treehouse, and I'd like to welcome you to the Saint in Progress podcast, your source for inspiration, information, and directions for your soul's journey back home to the Father's house. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and most importantly, share the show. As a reminder, your financial support is how we keep the lights on in the treehouse. You can support us by buying a book or rosary from our store, or by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack. You can find more information on all these things at saintinprogress.com or catholictreehouse.com. Let's get started. Hello, my fellow saints in progress. Welcome to episode 4 of the Saint in Progress podcast. Hope you're having a blessed day. Mine started off pretty good, so I'm in a pretty energetic mood. And I'm very excited to talk about this topic today because it's not something that a lot of people talk about, but it's so incredibly eye-opening once you finally understand it. So buckle up, I'm going to dive right in. First, let's do a little recap. Where are we now? Well, the picture should be getting a little bit clearer about yourself and your nature, the nature we all share. As we look at the picture, we should be able to make out a shape, and it looks like an arrow, but it's still kind of fuzzy. But today we're going to bring that arrow into focus. And the next few episodes will zero in and figure out where on the map that "you are here" dot is that the arrow is pointing to. So we started off with a wide view. What are we doing? Well, our souls are trying to get home, and this life is about getting them there. And this show is about helping you and other saints in progress on that journey. So from the wide angle view, we zoomed in a little bit closer. Episode 2 covered original sin and our shared birth defect, and we looked at the importance of understanding what original sin means to us and why it's passed on from generation to generation. Last episode, we got a little bit closer still. We talked about the handicaps we have because of original sin. It was an important episode, so let's dive in a little bit more detail with our recap here. Because of original sin, our emotion and reason are out of order, and we are inclined to make decisions based on how we feel rather than thinking things through. We are impulsive, and our understanding of truth is distorted. That's truth about God, truth about other people, and truth about ourselves. The most important takeaway from last episode is that we lie to ourselves about ourselves. If you missed episode 3 or you need a refresher on the details about how we lie to ourselves about ourselves, it's only about 14 minutes long, so I recommend you go back and listen to it. As the episodes roll on, I'm going to be referring to the foundational truths in episode 3 quite often because they're pretty important, and also they're universal to every human being. Okay, so we also talked about the virtue of humility, and I introduced you to the Litany of Humility, which is a really powerful prayer, and I hope that you're continuing to pray that on a somewhat regular basis. We'll do a whole episode later on humility and how to cultivate it as a virtue, but right now your takeaway should be that humility is about accepting the truth about yourself. These things, original sin and its effects, we all suffer from them. But now we're going to focus a little bit on something more personal and individual, and that's how the devil tempts and tricks us into sinning. Before I go any further, I want to clarify what I mean by the devil tricking us into sinning. Let's look at 1 Peter 5, verse 8, where he says, "Be sober and watch, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, goes about seeking whom he may devour." Make no mistake, the devil hates us. He hates all of us. But unless you're a particularly afflicted soul, he's not constantly bugging you. Lions wait. Lions watch. They stalk. And then they pounce. I like to use the visual. Picture the devil sitting in a chair with a cigarette and a cocktail. Just waiting. Just watching you. He sees what attracts your eyes. What makes your pulse beat a little bit faster. He's learning about you. Seeing how you act. How you react in different situations. What your habits are. And when you're at your weakest, when you're not paying attention, when you're distracted, he pounces. He finishes his drink in one gulp, takes one last drag on his cigarette, stands up, and comes over and whispers in your ear. So what we need to figure out about ourselves is what our biggest weakness is. What is the lever the devil can pull to get us to move towards sin? That lever has a name. It's something called root sin. It's called root sin because it lies at the root of all our other sins. If you've ever dealt with crabgrass or other weeds, you know, unless you get to the root, it's going to come back. Now we have this stuff growing on our mulch beds, these little clusters of leaves. And I found out that it's common violet, which is in the family of plants called tuberous rhizomes. Now, that stuff seems to be impossible to get out. You pull it, and the tiniest bit of root remains, and the next thing you know, it's back. We've tried Roundup and all that stuff too, but it keeps coming back. The only way we would be able to get rid of it, the only hope that we would have in getting rid of it, would be to remove the top 6 inches of mulch and soil and replace it. But then there's no guarantee that there wouldn't be these little tubular rhizomes in the new stuff that we put in. And there's no guarantee that there's not a tubular rhizome little snippet sitting around somewhere that's still going to grow up anyways. So it's something that we're going to have to deal with as long as we live in this house. So root sin is the same way. Root sin is the tuberous rhizome in our soul. Now, unfortunately, it's something we all have, but it's a little bit different for everyone. You see, while root sin is the catch-all term, it's divided into 3 categories: pride, vanity, and sensuality. That's like saying mine is common violet, yours might be field bindweed, and someone else's is nutsedge. And exactly how it manifests in you, where it grows, how it grows, well, that is unique to you. So let's take our hypothetical example from last episode, the guy who buys the home theater system he can't afford. Let's call him, I don't know, Gus. Apologies to anybody listening named Gus, but I don't know anybody named Gus, so I don't want anyone I know who's listening to think I'm talking about them, okay? So for a hypothetical man named Gus, let's say that his root sin is pride. He might be buying that home theater system because he wants to be able to brag to his neighbors. Gus also might be buying it because he wants to be able to say, I recognized that my family wasn't happy, and I knew a home theater system would fix my family's dysfunction by bringing us all together. I'm proud because I fixed the problem. Gus might be saying he bought it because someone at work just bought a home theater system, and Gus feels his pride is wounded because he has the same job as his coworker, and he wants to keep up with the Joneses. We can see how this root sin of pride can be manifested in many different ways, all very personal to Gus. And that comes because the devil has spent Gus's entire life studying him to figure out exactly how to pull that lever. I could give similar examples for vanity or sensuality, but I think you get the idea. You see, we all have these root sins, those levers the devil can pull on, but one of them is always more powerful than the others. Reverend Garrigou Lagrange, a Dominican priest and one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, called it our predominant fault. So the devil may pull on the pride lever one day and the sensuality lever or vanity lever the next. There's one of the 3 that is the most powerful for you. And it will always be there. It will always be a weakness. It will always be a problem for you. Figuring out your root sin is important because once your root sin is identified and you start working on dealing with it, then you can begin to work on obedience and spiritual meekness. And all that begins the ascent of the soul and begins your soul's journey home to the Father. But before we tackle anything else, we need to address root sin. So how do we figure out our root sin? How do we figure out which one of the 3 is our predominant root sin, the one we need to deal with first and primarily? For that, I highly recommend finding a good spiritual director. Why? Because as we discussed last episode, we lie to ourselves about ourselves. And we realize we need to eliminate this spiritual weakness. The devil is going to try to confuse us. He's going to try to trick us into lying to ourselves about ourselves because now we're on to him. Now we're making some progress in our spiritual lives, and he doesn't want that. So there's a tool you need to use in addition to the litany of humility, and it's called a spiritual director. A spiritual director can be a priest or a deacon, but doesn't have to be. There are some colleges and seminaries that offer a course in spiritual direction, and some dioceses have a directory of spiritual directors. Spiritual directors are trained in things like helping you identify your root sin. And let me tell you from personal experience, it's a lot faster to identify your root sin when you have help. When I first ran across the concept of root sin and began reading about it, it was in the middle of COVID, and I was between spiritual directors. My first spiritual director was a parish priest, and he got reassigned, and it took me a better part of a year to find a new one because of COVID and all the rest of this stuff. I didn't want to wait to find a spiritual director to address this problem, so I started the process of trying to figure it out on my own. Let me tell you, it was a frustrating process to try to do it myself. I'd often find myself thinking that my root sin was vanity, but then I'd peel away the onion and say, no, it's pride. And then I'd peel a little bit more and say, no, it's sensuality. Then I'd go back to vanity. It was excruciating, frustrating, spiritually exhausting. I finally got the right answer, but only through months and months of prayer and introspection and more prayer. Because why? Because I kept lying to myself about myself, and because the devil kept tricking me and confusing me so I couldn't figure out which lever it was that he kept pulling on. If you find a good spiritual director that you click with, they could probably help you figure it out in a matter of weeks. St. Bernard of Clairvaux is famous for saying, anyone who takes himself for his own spiritual director is the disciple of a fool. So don't be a fool, find a spiritual director. It might take some time, but it's totally worth it. And while you're searching, start keeping notes. Prayerfully examine your conscience on a regular basis, daily if you can. Just make a reflection of a few minutes and think about situations where you struggled, where you felt internal unrest or lack of clarity. And look for those moments where, looking backwards, you acted from emotion rather than reason. The notes will help you when you meet with your spiritual director to have a much more fruitful meeting. The other thing that I want you to remember is how important it is to deal with root sin. St. Philip Neri, who is sought after for his spiritual direction, said, certain voluntary attachments to self-love must be cut through, and then we must dig round them, and then remove the earth, till we get down deep enough to find the place where they're rooted and interlaced together. That, my friends, is root sin. It's pride and vanity and sensuality all interlaced together. And with the help of a good spiritual director, you can dig down and find the one that is your predominant one, so you can deal with it. Like common violets in my mulch beds, the tuberous rhizomes, it'll keep coming back. But at least you'll know how to deal with it. And you know you're going to have to stay on top of it. So finally, there's one other thing that I want you to keep in mind going forward. Don't think that once you figure out and strengthen your defenses against temptations that involve your root sin, that you're no longer going to be bothered by it. And just when you think you have it licked, just when you think you have a handle on it, and you're confident that you can resist these temptations, the devil's going to start pulling one of the other root sin levers, and before you realize it, bam, he's pounced again. So then you start focusing on the other root sin, and your predominant fault will start giving you trouble again. But if you want good-looking landscaping, you have to put in continuous work. And if you want to be a saint, you have to put in continuous work. It's going to be a never-ending battle, but it is one that you can and one that you will be able to battle successfully. So take courage, my fellow saints in progress. And most of all, have patience with yourself. Remember, getting home to the Father's house is a journey. It's a process. Invite the Holy Spirit in to help you, and He will, so long as you're open to the changes that you are going to need to make. Speaking of the Holy Spirit, we've been talking a lot about sin. Original sin, the effects of original sin, root sin. It's time we talk about how we wash away original sin. So next week, we're going to talk about baptism and the gifts the Holy Spirit pours into us when we are baptized. We're also going to meet a fellow traveler who is one of my favorite saint stories from the early church. So don't miss it. Thanks for listening today. Make sure to subscribe. We have a lot of road to cover. If you're already a subscriber, consider upgrading to a paid subscriber. That way I can keep the lights on in the treehouse and keep these episodes coming. You can also head over to catholictreehouse.com and pick up a Saint in Progress t-shirt, a print copy of the Saint Challenge, or other unique books, such as the Letters of Mother Cabrini. Or you can shop our selection of handcrafted rosaries. Hey, we are coming up on Christmas shopping season. If you want a custom rosary for that special someone, our cutoff deadline for custom rosaries is December 5th. So make sure you get your custom order in before that. Finally, who do you know that is another saint in progress? Family, friend, coworker, neighbor? I mean, we're all saints in progress, right? But who do you want on this journey with you? Tell them about the show. Okay? So that's it for this week. Remember, you are a saint in progress. So go out there and be a saint.